Good morning and welcome to another edition of Ziggy'S World. And today I've got David Griffiths from the Majority Show, and we're going to be discussing tactical voting and other issues. Good morning, David. How are you?
Hi, Mark. All good here. Thank you very much. Yep. Thanks for having me on.
So we'll get straight into it. What do you think of the last few days? Because even by Scottish politics, by what we've seen in the past, this has been quite extraordinary. What's happened in the last 3 or 4 days, even. So what do you make about it?
Yeah, we're watching a party slowly die. I think really the SNP is imploding in front of us. We know they've had a knack for years for passing very, very low grade, very poor quality legislation and bills that frankly can't work. And they've exceeded all previous efforts with the hate crimes bill, which is never, ever going to work. It's just so full of holes and so full of utter nonsense. We've also had the unbelievable sight of Mary McCallan, the very, very youthful-looking net zero and transport secretary, coming into Holyrood saying, yeah, well, we fired the guy in charge of the ferries because there are going to be delays and costs increases. Oh, yeah, tell us about them. I don't know, no idea. The board will tell you. What would I know? And it's just like, what are we seeing here exactly? It's just farce after farce. And I can't believe the Scottish public is going to look at this and say, now there's a party that deserves my vote. I really can't believe, I can't understand who's voting for these clowns any longer, really.
I think Holmes has completely and utterly lost control of the party.
Yeah, indeed, agreed. I think there's almost open rebellion. I don't know if you saw the other day, Angus Brendan McNeill, as he calls himself, who's now an independent, of course. He's one of the 4 SNP MPs who have changed party. He came out saying, oh yeah, whispers that there's going to be a big challenge to Humza if and when, or rather when and if is the way he put it, they lose a lot of seats in this year's election, which I think is the expectation even within the SNP itself, and certainly within the SNP MPs in Westminster. They know what's coming, and a lot of them stand to lose their jobs, so they're hardly going to go meekly like little lambs to slaughter just for Humza's sake. So expect more open warfare within the SNP in the coming months, I would say.
What did you make of this? And I've seen it abroad in certain countries where you see open, even fighting in Parliament and that. But what did you make of Shona Robinson's? Not just the words she used, which Stephen Kerr took as a threat, but the way she did it as well, because she was basically having to be held back and taken out of the Parliament because of the way she was getting so, angry at Stephen and then at the Conservatives. And the presiding officer was so weak. What did you make of that bit?
Well, I watched it, and you could see Shona Robinson. You know that meme where you've got a woman crying and pointing at a guy's face? That's what she was like. She was practically saying, I'm going to do you, I'm going to get you, you're going to be in trouble. And all that. That's pretty much what it was like. And she practically was being bodily dragged out of the place. Stephen Kerr's just saying, hang on, guys, he's just... But the word she used, you're going to fall from a very high place. What are you going to do? Take him round to Humza's brother-in-law's place? Yeah, good luck. So, I mean, honestly, you cannot threaten people with what's a very overt physical threat to their well-being. You can't do that in a chamber, surely. Or maybe you can. But the look on the presiding officer's face was just like,
well,
I don't know what to do, as you see so often.
The way I saw it, she was basically... because they'd left, the cabinet had left, Shona Robinson had left, and she was lecturing Stephen Kerr like a 10-year-old, like you would in the playground, where you say, well, don't, just leave them alone. Don't bother them. Stay away from them. That's what she was basically doing. And I'm thinking, you're talking to an adult, you're talking to an MSP. What you should be doing is, we'll bring back Parliament. I'm gonna get in touch with the cabinet. We're going to bring them back, and we're going to sort this out.
Yes,
in Parliament. I found it quite cringeworthy, to be honest with you, to see that in action.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary, because what the presiding officer does have the power to do, as you rightly say, is recall the Deputy First Minister immediately and say, I'd like you to explain what you said and what you meant. She should have done that publicly. But what I have heard from a friend, an MSP friend previously, is that if anyone transgresses in the chamber, what usually happens is the presiding officer and her associated goons, I guess some security guys or whips or whatever, will go to that the errant MSP's office and say, we heard what you said, don't you ever do that again, you have to apologise. And that's what normally happens. That would be the standard procedure. Doesn't look like that's happening with the Deputy First Minister. Of course, we don't know because the Chamber is, I guess, in session right now. FMQs is due to start at 12. I would imagine there will be a question about this. I would hope there's going to be a question about this. But you're right, the presiding officer is clearly not doing her job right now. She looks completely incapable of doing her job. She seems adrift. She seems clueless, and she always appears to side with the government when there's any question of, should somebody have said what they said. She seems a lot more ready and willing to make an opposition MSP, be it Douglas Ross or anybody else, stop talking and behave, far more so than she does any of the government people. She did have a little bit of a dig at Humza last week, and he gave her a look as if to say, do you not realise who you're talking to? It's quite chilling, So there's some very strange stuff going on there. And I would say it quite openly, the presiding officer is not fit for purpose, not even close. She is well short of the required mark, totally. But then, as are all of the cabinet ministers, frankly. But the idea that Shona Robison could threaten anybody, I mean, who are we kidding? Shona? But the very idea that she feels equipped to do it in the chamber, in view and earshot of everybody, with a clear threat to somebody's well-being. Well, okay, seriously, something's amiss in that place, Mark. Something's badly wrong.
The thing I've touched on, and I'm no fan of Nicola Sturgeon by any stretch of the imagination, but you would never have seen that when she was First Minister. You would never have seen that. I think she had the party in more of control, and dare I say, even more professionally run than what we're seeing right now.
I think that's very fair comment. I mean, I made the point last night on the Majority podcast. Sturgeon and Salmond also were very astute political operators. They were very articulate people. They still are, albeit a little bit, shall we say, limited. But they did have political instinct, and there was no way that Sturgeon would have allowed a scene like that, I don't think. Whereas Humza is just a little boy adrift. He doesn't know what to do. And he truthfully just says the first thing that comes into his head every single time he's asked anything. And I made the point last night, Kate Forbes is the same. That's why she got into all that trouble by saying, I don't really agree with sex outside marriage. Right, that sounds like a good one. That's a surefire winner there, Kate. Well done, darling. But it's just, these people just speak before they think all the time. And they don't seem to have any vision of, or breadth of vision, I should say, as if to say, how does this look? And you just wonder if they ever actually do listen to themselves, because what they come out with is a load of contradictory, embarrassing, humiliating rubbish constantly. And the way that it reflects on them as individuals, on their party, and on Holyrood, and indeed Scotland more widely, it's not good, guys, I can tell you. You're not making a success of this, trust me. So somebody needs to get some self-awareness in that party very soon, or else they need to start listening to some advisors, or else get some advisors, because there's something going badly wrong. But as far as we're concerned, please keep doing it though, guys, because you're tearing yourselves apart right now and making yourselves unelectable. If they think they're getting anything close to 50% of the vote in this year's election, guys, I've got news for you. Not even anywhere near it. So by all means, keep fighting. But it's just, the concern is what an awful spectacle it's making of Scotland right now. And some of the decisions they're making, like all this endless sums of money going to Gaza when they're pleading poverty. I mean, really, how long can this go on? And all these calls for, Israel must do this and Israel must do that. And let's let in thousands of Palestinians. Guys, that's not a great idea right now. But anyway, yes, it's very unfortunate for everyone in Scotland that we're having to watch this group of miscreants falling apart while they're supposedly running the country, which they're manifestly not doing. So it can't really go on. Something has to change.
Yeah, and after this quick break, David, we're gonna discuss this, and we're gonna discuss the main topic, which is tactical voting and how we can change what's happened over the last 17 years with because something has to change in our habits, because if it doesn't, we may get the same again. But so we do, something has to change. So after this quick couple of second break, we'll get into the main topic.
Okay.
Welcome back, David. Now then, well, tactical voting. Yes. And I know this is something that you're really passionate about, and what we need to do, because 17 years of splitting the vote has allowed this to happen, to where we are now. So we do have to change our habits. So what is it? Explain to us what you mean by tactical voting.
Yeah, sure. You've summed up the dichotomy facing us really there with that intro, because the majority of people in Scotland, let me just caveat that a little, the majority of electors in Scotland vote for parties which are not pro-independence. That's always been the case. There's only been, I think, one election, which was the 2021 Holyrood election, where the votes on the regional list showed a marginal, just over 50% share of the vote going to pro-independence parties. That is SNP, Alba, the Greens, and whichever other parties. Every other election in Scotland, a majority of the votes has gone to parties which do not back independence. But some of the stats are quite staggering. I'll just very quickly give you one stat right now. For example, in the 2021 constituency vote, the pro-nationalist parties won 48% of the votes, but 85% of the seats, which means, obviously, conversely, pro-independent, pro-UK parties took 52% of the votes and 15% of the seats. So there's something clearly not too democratic about that. Now, if it was just one party, the SNP, getting more than 50% of the votes, or almost 50% of the votes, you'd say, well, that's pretty conclusive. But there are actually three parties, Alba, the Greens, SNP. The Alban Greens don't win enough votes to get seats. The SNP does. So consequently, you'll get the SNP winning a lot of seats with just over 40% of the votes, sometimes 39% of the votes. The classic example of how we're doing this badly came in the constituency vote in East Lothian in 2021, when Labour was the sitting incumbent, and the Conservatives gave Craig Hoy the constituency as his opportunity to win his way into Holyrood via the constituency. The Labour candidate finished 1,200 votes short of the SNP total. Craig Hoy himself took 9,000 votes for the Conservatives in third place, and the Lib Dem candidate took 1,500. So either of those two totals, either the Lib Dem total, certainly the Conservative total, added to the Labour total, would have given Labour the ability to retain the seat. But they didn't. But for the third place party to take 9,000 votes, it's just utterly ridiculous. Those votes are all wasted, and this is what people don't realise. In a first past the post election, if you come second or third, that vote was wasted. Nothing happens to it. There's no correlation between what happens with the constituency vote in Holyrood and what happens in the list. You can win a list seat without even standing in a constituency. So it's not as if those votes in some way counted. They didn't. They were all lost. The people who cast those votes would have been as well tearing it up or else blowing their nose in the ballot paper for all the good it did. But that's the crazy situation that can't go on. We can't let a guy, and this was, what's the guy's name? Paul McClellan. He won that seat. He took the seat. He's now the housing minister, and we know the state that is the Scottish housing's in under him. I mean, have you ever heard him speaking? The guy's utterly clueless. And this is the caliber of MP that's being allowed, or MSP, that's being allowed to sneak in, because the pro-UK vote is so absurdly split. So what I had done 3 years ago when I was involved with All for Unity was try to persuade people that the way to vote in the Holyrood election was to say, if you cast your vote wisely in the constituency for the party and the candidate best placed to beat the SNP, and then vote for a party which maybe isn't standing candidates in the list, that's how you maximise the votes, because that's how you get the full power of your first vote and the full power of your second vote, because with the don't system, you cannot vote for the same party both in the constituency and the region and get the same power of both votes. Either the first one loses or the second one's halved. That's how it's done. That's to stop one party completely dominating. So the answer is tactical voting. So we put out, All for Unity put out this list saying this is who you should vote for in the constituencies. Didn't really take off. It did to an extent. You did see some measure of tactical voting. And what tactical voting means is you'll be in a constituency and you may have, for example, let's say you're in North East 5 in the Holyrood constituency and you're a Labour voter. Well, Labour's not probably going to win there, but the Lib Dems are very strong there. Willie Rennie's the candidate. So if you vote for him, the chances are that he'll win and the SNP won't. So if your main objective in voting is to keep the SNP out, that's what you do. So you could see this because the vote share for the Lib Dems in the constituencies in 2021 was way, way above the vote share in the regions and the regional list. So that means people are using, to an extent, tactical voting. We saw it also in East Renfrewshire when Jackson Carlaw won, very tight race. We saw it in Dumbarton when Jackie Baillie won. What that meant was some Conservatives in Dumbarton were voting Labour for Jackie Baillie, and some Labour guys in East Ren were voting Conservative to let Jackson Carlaw in. And really, it is that simple. It's a simple enough proposition. The difficulty is persuading people to do it. I'll explain what I mean. Just stop me when you want me to shut up, Mark. But
no, carry on.
Yep. So the idea of tactical voting, very simply, is you've got a constituency. And remember, first past the post is what we do in Westminster. Second doesn't count. Second is nowhere. Second's last. In several seats throughout Scotland, let's say, I think probably between 9 and 12, the Conservatives probably are best placed to win those seats in Scotland. And you're talking about seats like the Borders, Berwickshire, and all those ones down there, Dumfries and Galloway, the ones up in Aberdeenshire. These are the seats they habitually win. Now, remember that the Conservatives won 6 seats in the Westminster general election 5 years ago in Scotland. They've also now got a 7th seat because Lisa Cameron's come on board. So they've got 7 seats. They've got, you would think they've got a good chance of winning. Reality, they won't win East Kilbride again. Lisa Cameron will not win again. But the other 6, they've got a good chance, and maybe 3 or 4 others. That's it. So in those seats, and we'll make it clear in the tactical voting guide which those seats are, the recommendation would be if your main objective in this election is to defeat the SNP or to see the SNP candidate defeated in your constituency, then in those 9, 10 constituencies, give your vote to the Conservative Party. Similarly, in 5 to 7 seats, the Lib Dems are best placed, and those are seats like Orkney and Shetland, Edinburgh South West, whatever it is. Again, North East 5, the Caithness seat up there, and a couple of others where they might be best placed, like East Dumbartonshire. That's probably the best placed party to beat the SNP there is the Lib Dems. Okay, everywhere else it's Labour, and now you're talking here probably 40 seats. Probably 40 seats in Scotland where Labour is the only party that can beat the SNP. Now, of course, that comes with issues, which I'll give you an opportunity to come in here because you'll know, Mark, there are an awful lot of people who we see every day saying, I can vote Labour. They back the GRR bill, they back the hate crimes bill.
Yeah.
So that's our problem right now, because we're asking people to vote for a party with whom a lot of voters and a lot of our, if you like, compadres don't really feel a great sense of affinity or kinship, and that is it was probably one of the biggest issues facing us.
Yeah, because the thing I keep hearing is, and I like you, and I've heard you say this before. I'm never ever going to tell somebody how or who they should vote for. That's not the point. That's not the thing. What we're trying to do.
Agreed.
So I would never ever tell somebody, you've got to vote for this person. That is your personal preference of whoever that's your right to vote for whoever you think you want, who you want. Yeah. But I always say, and it's the one thing I say all the time is, if you're voting Conservative because you'll never vote Labour, and you know that Conservative candidate is not going to win, then if you want the SNP to be in power for another 5 years, then please go ahead and vote for that candidate.
Yeah.
Because we've done 17 years of the same thing, of voting because I've always voted Conservative or I've always voted Labour. I'm going to carry on doing that because that's all I've always done that. If, that has not worked. We've seen that 17 years. It's not worked. We have to do something. And I think it's got to the point in Scotland where if we don't, this is the time. It's now. It's now. This is the time. The SNP are the weakest they've ever been in 17 years.
Yes.
So if we don't get rid of them now, out of power, and vote them out, we're going to be stuck with the SNP for another 20 odd years.
It's
because
true.
If we don't get rid of them now, when will they ever get rid of them? So I think it's more important now to do this tactical voting, and even just say, and I know I would do this if my area is Conservative and I vote Conservative, so I will do that again because the Conservatives will win this area.
Yeah.
But I know if it was a Labour one in this area, I would vote for this election, for the next two elections, the general election and the Holyrood election. I would bite the bullet and say, personally, I would bite the bullet and I would vote for a different party because we have to get rid of these. And you know, even if you say I'll do it for this election, just to get rid of the SNP, and then we'll see how it goes with because it looks like Labour's going to win the general election. It looks like Labour are the ones that are going to be pushing at the Holyrood elections in Scotland next elections. So my view is, well, I know the GRR bill is a big issue. I know there's a lot more. You know, they voted for the hate bill. I know this, but I think we could. Labour are a party, in my view, that we can work with. We can work on. We can. We've got them to change their mind on the GRR. Starmer's starting to backtrack.
Yep.
He's now. I'm hearing a lot of MSPs in Scotland are now starting to criticise and backtrack on the hate bill. I think they're a party we can actually work with and get them to change their mind on certain policies.
Yeah.
So I think it's now is the time, but we can't rely. And I want to touch on this with you. We can't rely on the Conservatives and Labour and the Libs to actually work together. We can't rely on them because I spoke with an MP, my local MP, at the last election, and I said to him, why don't you work with Labour to get rid of the SNP? And he said, we wanted to, we approached Labour, and Labour said, no chance. And it's not going to work. So it's going to have to be us, isn't it, David? It's going to have to be people.
That's a really, really crucial point you make there, Mark, because the parties cannot realistically work together for a common aim unless we're in something like wartime or time of pandemic, unless there's a global emergency facing us. And it sounds frustrating to people. It frustrated me at first, but then when you dig a tiny bit deeper than just the surface, you see that it isn't really practical. Now, there are several things I'll give for the benefit of, you know most of this, I know, but for the benefit of some of the listeners who may not know the backdrop to it all, let me try and explain why it is parties won't work together, particularly in Scotland. First off, parties all have party machineries. Right down the street from where I live is the Labour office for the 3 MSPs in this region. Now, first off, if a Labour Party a parachick or a Labour Party official says, right, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to stand down our candidate here. Well, those 3 people are out of a job for a start. So you can't really, on a whim, say, I tell you what, we'll just stand out because we probably won't win. You are relying on people working here, and they're feeding their children on the basis of the wages they get from the party. So that's one point, I guess. But secondly, in terms of politics, look at what happened in 2014. For the greater good in Scotland, you had Labour, Lib Dem and Conservative figures, very senior figures, some MPs, some MSPs, standing on the same platform. And that was like manna from heaven to the SNP, because they just said, look, there's no difference between Tory and Labour, and that's where this Red Tories nonsense came from, right there. And thankfully, they stood firm, and the right side won the referendum. But look at what happened the following year. As almost a reaction to this, Labour went into that election in Scotland holding 42 seats. By the end of that election, Labour had lost 41 of those 42 seats. That's what happened. They got the kicking of their lives. And they are haunted by this. Scottish Labour is haunted by this to this day, and I mean that. I'll give you an example. A very senior Labour figure in Scotland was asked by a group I know, a pro-UK group, not in any way extremists, would he come and talk to him, and he met with their top person. And the conversation went thus. Okay, tell us, are you a unionist? Yes, I am. You believe in the UK? Yes, I do. Would you ever work with the SNP? No, I wouldn't. Would you ever give them a second referendum? Certainly not. Would you go into coalition with them? Absolutely not. So you're totally committed to the UK? Yes, I am. Right, you've got to come out and say it. And he said, I can't. Can't say it. It would cost me too many votes. I can't say it. Now, this is the problem. In Scottish politics, there's a triangulation. This means the SNP really fears Labour, so they pretend they fear the Conservatives. Okay, the Conservatives don't want Labour to win, but they don't massively want the SNP to win either. But of the two, they probably prefer that the SNP were maybe slightly stronger than Labour because they don't want Labour to kick them out. Labour, on the other hand, how would I say? Sorry, the SNP just hates everybody, and the SNP just wants everybody to lose to them. But the Conservative Party, their primary thing is to keep the Conservatives in power and keep Conservative MSPs elected and keep Conservative MPs elected, whereas Labour are a little bit looking both ways. They're pro-UK in the main, but they do have a lot of MPs and MSPs who are maybe flexible on the issue. They also have a lot of voters, they think, or potential voters, they think, who are what they call soft nats, which means they might favour it, but don't really want to vote for it right now. So that's the problem we've got. Every one of the parties is looking two ways. And so they can't just say, Labour can't come out and say, I oppose the SNP and so does the Conservative Party, so vote for either one of us and you'll be fine. They're never going to do that, unfortunately. Conservatives the same. They'll make a public showing of saying, yeah, we're for it, but in the background, all the Conservative Party wants to do, as I say, is get their own people elected. That's their primary consideration. Yes, the Conservative Party doesn't want the SNP to be breaking up the country. Not at all. I wouldn't pretend they do. But that being said, the Conservative Party is quite sanguine about the SNP winning more seats than Labour does if it stops Labour winning. Because here's a wee stat for you. I think there have been either 10 or 11 Labour victories in general elections. In every single one of those general election victories, Labour has also had a majority of the votes and the seats in Scotland. Labour has never once won a UK general election without also winning the most seats and the most votes in Scotland. And here you've got Hamza Yousaf saying, Labour's going to win. It doesn't matter what happens in Scotland. Really? Well, it's never happened in the past. So the election strategy for the SNP is utterly bizarre. They're saying, what we're going to do is we're going to get all the Tories out. There are only 6 of them. What do you mean all of them? That's 6 out of 57. That's not going to help, especially when they're saying Labour's going to win the election anyway. So what they're trying to say is there's no point voting Labour. What they're really saying is there's no point voting SNP. Because what is the point? You've got all these MPs in London already who are achieving the square root of nothing by being there. All they can do is stand up every week and say, we want independence. Scotland would be better if we were independent. And then Penny Mordaunt or one of the other cabinet ministers just says, well, it's not going to happen. You've had a vote. It's not going to happen. So they're going nowhere, and they know they're going nowhere. So going back to what we were saying at first, you won't get them working together openly. The parties will not work together. We know that. What they will do, though, and this is the subtlety of it, if you like, when you saw that story the other day in the Press and Journal saying, oh, look at this, Labour hasn't even picked a third of its candidates yet. Okay, but you look at the seats. The 10 of the seats in which they haven't picked a candidate are seats they've got no chance of winning because they're already being held by the Conservatives or the Lib Dems. So that's the way that you will actually see a party not openly, not overtly working tactically, but in reality, they're not going to give much focus to any of those seats because they're not going to win them. So why would they? What is the point? They're far better channeling their focus on seats they can win. And believe me, Labour can win an awful lot of seats, a lot of seats. The only way it will happen, exactly as you said, Mark, is the voters decide this is how we're going to do it. Because in private, you might get some discussions with the parties. You will never, as in never, get any party coming out and saying the primary objective of this election is to defeat the SNP and we will do whatever it takes, including working with other parties to make that happen. They might as well just put a noose around their neck because that would kill them electorally. They couldn't do it, or that's the way they see it anyway. So we've got this crazy situation in Scotland where Labour thinks that to beat the SNP, they must oppose the Tories. The SNP thinks that to beat Labour, they must oppose the Tories. And the Tories think, well, we're kind of stuck in the middle here. And that's what's happening right now. So that, if it's not the greatest explanation I've ever given, but that's what causes the situation that we're in. Will the Labour Party say, yeah, you should vote Tory here? Not a chance. Will the Conservative Party say, yeah, you should vote Labour here? No, they won't do that. But what they will do, and you will see this, the Conservative Party, Douglas Ross, will say something like, well, we've been open to discussions with Labour, but they're just not interested. And you'll hear that a lot. The Lib Dems, damn them, will say nonsense like, oh, of course, you know, we're the middle ground between the Scottish nationalists who want to break up the UK and these British nationalists who want to abolish all of it. There is no such thing as a British nationalist. They can ignore that. That's just the Liberal Democrats trying to be more right on and more progressive than the SNP, trying and failing as they always do. But I won't slag them off too much because there are at least 4 seats where we need them to win. So this, I'm sure you can hear what I'm getting at here. The opposition parties in Scotland are not strong. We know they're not. They're a pretty rum lot, to be honest with you. They've got their own focus. They've got their own ambitions and their own aims. Should they be doing what we do? Should they be coming out all guns blazing and say the important thing is the sanctity of this country and that we respect and that we ensure the continuation of the United Kingdom? As far as I'm concerned, yes. As far as you're concerned, I think thousands of us are concerned, yes, they should. The reality, the political reality is that's a difficult message for them to convey, so they just don't bother. And so what they do instead is have their own little fights, leaving it up to us, people like us, you, me, Mark, Mary, to do what we do, which is what none of these guys are doing. And you're certainly not seeing any of this sort of discussion on TV, are you, ever? So
no, that actually leads into the next question. How do we get the message out to a wider audience and get people thinking tactical voting? How do we do it? How do you just mentioned the Majority Show, which reaches a lot of people, that reaches a lot of people, so that makes a difference. And I know you, Mark and Mary, you do a great job, and with the billboards, and I can imagine coming the election, there'll be billboards, there'll be flyers, there'll be all sorts. But we need to reach a wide, the whole of Scotland. We need to reach out a wide audience. So how do we do this, David?
That is the challenge in a nutshell, because we've got a big audience to an extent. We've got several thousand. I've got, I don't know, 16,000 viewers, which isn't huge. Followers all. Mark's got what? Mark and Mary have got what? Double that. You probably got the same, more. So we've got small amounts of, decent amounts of people, but in the reality, most of my followers will follow the majority, and vice versa, and you the same. So it's not huge, really. You couldn't exactly add them all together and say this is how many we've got in total. That's not the case, unfortunately. The people in Scotland, traditionally, the voters would take their cues from newspapers. Newspapers won't really talk to groups like us. I mean, occasionally the Express talks to me. Some of the TV channels, Talk TV, GB News have interviewed me, have interviewed Mark. Limited numbers, really. So the trick is to get it into the mainstream, and that's the mainstream media, be it TV and papers, if you can. But that's a big challenge, because we are seen absurdly as far right, or as British nationalists. That's how some journalists actually openly refer to us, which is laughable. There's nothing nationalist about us at all. Quite the reverse. We're opposed to nationalism in all its forms. So one way that you can do this is I work with another group, like what's called the Unionist Clubs of Scotland, and the name's a bit of a misnomer. It's not anything to do with Northern Ireland. This is to do with the continuation of the UK. And the idea of these people is to reach out to people who are of a similar mind, to say, this is what we believe. We believe that the SNP is killing Scotland. We must end the threat of nationalism. What we are doing, along with those guys, is a little exercise to get an initiative to get people who didn't traditionally vote to become more aware. So it's going out to communities and saying, okay, this is what we think. Tell me, what would you normally vote? Oh, I don't vote. Okay, if you are going to vote, which way would you vote? And we gather that data, if you like. And then what we do, exactly as you said earlier, is to say to them, well, okay, vote for anybody you like. It's entirely your prerogative. It's your vote. Nobody can tell you who to vote for. What I would say to you, however, is if your main objective from this election is to defeat the SNP, in our opinion, the recommended party or candidate to vote for in your constituency is this one, because we believe that person has the best way of ousting the best chance of ousting the SNP. Now, that way, you're not backing a party as such. You're not beholden to anybody. You're just saying
information out. You're giving them information and something to think about.
Absolutely right.
Make their own decision on it.
Exactly, and that's reaching a section of the electorate which wouldn't normally vote, because you look at any election, any general election, the turnout's normally about 66%, normally. In by-elections, it's far less, it's 30-something%. I thought in Hamilton and Rutherglen and Hamilton West, people would be so outraged that they'd come out and vote. Absolutely not. I think it was you who said, nah, it's going to be about half that. About half what I thought it was tiny. But in general elections, people do bother to vote, and that's why the choice of date this year is crucial. It won't be in May, because the council elections in England are in May. They won't have 2 elections. They won't do that, and it's too late now for it to be May the 2nd. It will be later on in the year, I'm certain. So we'll see. But so that's part of it, Mark, is to get out to new people. More widely, though, you have to get people who do vote maybe to think about changing the way that they do it. And my suggestion would be, I'm going to a roadshow in Edinburgh tonight, for example, to talk about this. And I would suggest we reach out to our local constituency candidates and say to them, look, we'd like to hold a discussion here and invite people along, and maybe do it that way. See if we can get local press coverage. See if we can get people just discussing it, because the greatest democratic event in Scotland's history, I think, unquestionably, was the referendum, simply because of the traction it got throughout Scotland. And what was the turnout was something like 83%. I mean, that's wonderful. That is true democracy in action. Yeah. Most people who could voted. That's what happened. And I'm not at all afraid of increasing the turnout, because I believe, truthfully, that most people who back independence or back the SNP are voting for them anyway. The people who don't bother voting are the people who just think, oh, this is pointless. Why would I vote for these clowns? Or maybe they don't see a viable opposition party to back. So I think it's stuff like that we do. It would be great if we could get traction from the mainstream media. I think the only way to do that is to get a sizable, if you like, base wherein we can say, look, we've got however many thousand followers on your show, however many thousand people are looking at the majority show. The unionist clubs have got so many thousand members. If you're talking in the thousands, then political parties genuinely do sit up and take notice. Media outlets do also. And I think what's also important is to get across to people that we're not all fervent extremists. We're not far right in the slightest. None of us. It's ridiculous. We're certainly not nationalist. We're absolutely not anti-Scotland. Quite the reverse. So I think it's only by getting our message across to more people that we will get more notice. And I think eventually, my belief is, before this election takes place, people will be reaching out to Mark, you, me, and saying, okay, we want to talk to you about this. We know what you represent. Tell us what you think. I do think that will happen, because it's all getting a little bit boring right now. I don't know if you watched Scotland Tonight, Rona Mackay, whatever her name is. She's interviewed Jenny Gilruth last night, and Jenny Gilruth, who's the education minister, is doing an appalling job and who's totally unsuited to it, although, or maybe because she's an ex-teacher, who just came out and shouted for about 10 minutes, babbled a load of absolute nonsense just to get her points across and to present the SNP propaganda spin from Bute House. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody's going to listen to that. But what people will listen to is people giving a reasoned argument, saying, in our opinion, nationalism is toxic to Scotland. Independence would destroy Scotland politically, socially, economically for centuries. So genuinely, please don't do this. And if we can back that up, yeah, people will listen to that for sure, because Scotland is not in a good place right now. It is in a look at Glasgow. I'm going to Glasgow this afternoon. Glasgow looks terrible. I moved back to Glasgow in 1980 after several years away, and it was like the Garden of Eden then compared to now. It had been sandblasted clean. Glasgow's miles better. There was enormous optimism in the city, and that was just at the start of the Thatcher premiership, when people were losing their jobs. Nonetheless, there was a sense of great buoyancy and happiness in Glasgow. You walk around Glasgow now, it's like Damascus or Bogota or something. It looks terrible. So something has to change. People in Scotland are not blind. Electors can see what's going on. And what I think we need to do also is start equating failure with the SNP, because it's under the SNP's watch that all this has happened, all of it. one positive I would say is you look at Humza's record. The SNP hasn't won a single by-election at any level since he came in. How many ministers has he lost? People has he lost? Lisa Cameron, in an unprecedented move, defected from the SNP to the Conservatives. Ennis Kilbride. And he's also lost, what's his name, Angus Brendan as well in that time. And Margaret Ferrier got papped out on his watch. He can't win a by-election. He can't win a kind look right now. So he's an electoral liability. He will lead them into this election, I'm certain, and I think they will suffer for it because the man is wholly out.
I've firmly believed, and I did make a prediction on Majority Show at Christmas, I think New Year, that they will lose between 30 and 35 seats. And it seems to be in the polls, it's roughly, they're saying it's round about that. And that's, but that's, what's happening, it's changing daily. There's more scandals, there's more things coming out. Like it's like I found out yesterday, I think it was, about Ford being downgraded.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that recorded police crime, whatever it is, stuff. Yes,
It's like the SNP are being investigated for huge frauds.
That's right.
3-year investigation, and while that's going on, the SNP are downgrading it to what counts as a misdemeanor,
and they'll just get a warning. That will be it. So they'll be told, "Oh, so you bought that camper van with money for which you can't account. Shouldn't do that, boys. Let this be a warning to you." Right, okay then. That's a fair call.
And I think I mentioned it on the space last night that I went into. I just think it's such bad politics in my view, but it's how can you turn around to the electorate or to the Scottish people and say, look, we've had a 3-year investigation, it's cost over £2 million, we've had huge police resources being taken away from other things to deal with this for 3 years, and we think there's a case here, but it's now a slap on the wrist. So
let them off for the warning. They've promised they wouldn't do it again.
They're guilty of something, probably fraud, but it's a misdemeanor now. It's a slap on the wrist.
No chance.
I think every rational, even nationalists in Scotland would turn around and say, "What is that? What is going on?"
Exactly. Yeah,
it just doesn't make sense.
Exactly, particularly when people are under threat as of next, whatever it is, Monday. They're under threat of being jailed for calling somebody by the wrong gender-related title. So if you call somebody Mr. instead of Mrs. or the other way around, you can be jailed for it, apparently.
Yeah, but if you do a massive fraud,
meanwhile you can exactly. And meanwhile, you can embezzle or misappropriate hundreds of thousands of pounds over here and just get, oh no. So, come on, that's just the sign of a broken society.
And it's not as if, because we've always had in the legal terms, we've always had certain crimes. There's always been certain crimes where there's not really victimless crimes, shall we say? That's right. Where you do get a warning for certain things, but fraud, in my view, there's always a victim.
Exactly. Well, you're defrauding somebody. You're taking money to which you're not entitled, and you can't have the government of the country doing that and not somebody being held liable. You simply can't do that. So I think so. So just to finish on how we get out more widely, I would say that the press has a part to play here. The pro-UK press, the Scottish Daily Express, funnily enough, is probably the most active at getting the message out. And the Daily Express is the outlet that printed that tactical voting guide, which is substantially the same as the one I did. Just so you know the numbers here, I'll give you the numbers I came up when I came up with the tactical voting guide, purely on my own analysis of all the seats. And I've been studying elections since 1970, since I was a wee boy. I was really boring me, Anyway, but I've been doing this since back then. And I looked at it and said, Labour's going to win at least 38 seats here, guys. The Conservatives might win. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Labour is going to come first or second, will be the main challengers in 38 seats. Conservatives maybe 12, Lib Dems maybe 7. And I discussed it with the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Lib Dems. They all said broadly in line with what we think, particularly the seats, but we're hopeful of a few more. Within 2 months, a tactical voting guide came out, which the Express printed, saying actually Labour's on track to win 40, or to be best challenger in 43 seats, the Conservatives in 9 and Lib Dems in 5. So I was 2 out in the Lib Dems, 3 out in the Conservatives. But every one of those seats that they said were still likely to be have the Conservatives as the main challengers were the same ones as in my guide, and everyone in the Lib Dems the same. The only difference was the other 5 were looking like they were going to go Labour, and that's simply because polling is showing right now in seats where Labour didn't do well 5 years ago, they are doing better now in polling. And just one final point I'd like to make in this, and a lot of people say, maybe by looking at this maybe superficially, no, how can you say that? Look how well the Conservatives did 5 years ago, and you're saying that Labour's going to beat them. Guys, 5 years ago, we had probably the most unique election in recent years, because you had Boris Johnson with a very simple message saying, vote for me and I'll get Brexit done. You had Labour led by an absolute clown who was completely unelectable in vast swathes of the country, including the north of England and particularly areas of Scotland. The Labour vote fell off a cliff in Scotland. It was the lowest vote ever. That will never be repeated. Corbyn, thank God, is long gone. That's finished now. Please, please, please. One message I would give. Don't look at the election 5 years ago and think, oh, Conservatives did well there. They're going to win. No, they're not. Guys, they're not. Unless the Conservatives won the seat last time, they won't win it this time. Okay, I promise you. I'm sorry if that's not what you want to hear, but it's a fact. Whereas Labour, yes, they've only won 1 seat last time. They're going to win dozens this time, or at least come, first or second. And all we care about in this election is the one party with the best chance of beating the SNP. So please, this is not a lecture. It's just saying that's the cold political polling reality of what's about to happen, genuinely. And you can say, oh no, he's wrong. I know our candidate is very good. It's not about candidates, guys. It's about national swings. That's what general elections are about. You're talking about tens of thousands of people, and nowhere does one person reach tens of thousands of people. Nobody knows tens of thousands of people. Nobody. Certainly not me. So just please believe me, this is what will happen. Vote the way you want, but believe me, that's what will transpire in this coming election. So either get with it and help to get the SNP out, or vote any way you like, but please be aware that is the political reality.
Yeah, I completely agree with it. My opinion of the next 2.5, 3 years is the general election obviously is important. It's important to send a message as well that the SNP are finished, and I think that's a big message from the general election, and it's to get, if we get rid of as many as we can get rid of going to Westminster, then the better.
Yes, definitely. Exactly.
I do think the next Holyrood election is, in my opinion, for me, it's the most important election in my lifetime.
Agreed.
It's not only an opportunity. If the SNP, in my view, the way everything's gone, the way things are going, if the SNP do win the next Holyrood election, I know, and I've said this on many a times, I'll be moving to England, because I don't think I could live with another 5 years, especially of Humza, if he was still First Minister. I would have, and I think a lot of people would actually consider the position in Scotland, because the way things are going. So, and I would be thinking, we're never going to get rid of these guys. We're never going to get rid of them if they win the next one. So I think the next Holyrood election is probably the most important election we'll have seen.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. I think you're quite right. I think I came into politics for the first time 3 years ago, having just been an onlooker. The reason I came in was I was terrified of what might happen if the SNP won that election. That's why we stood. That's why Mary stood as well, and several others of us who were never involved in politics before, because we thought we've got to do something. We've got to try and stop these people, because this country is in desperate trouble if we don't. Next time, you're absolutely right, because we've seen the quality of legislation they've put through. What in the name of God are they going to do next time if they get down? So it is vital. I think we will see tactical voting to an even greater extent, and there's the capability to, if you like, game the system is probably an unfair way of putting it. the voting mechanism in the Holyrood election lends itself to tactical voting more comprehensively than, say, a first past the post election does, to a certain extent, simply because of the regional list, the second votes, where you can utilize particular voting methods to help get more people of not one party but of one movement into power. And this is why, for example, Mark, just see, back up your point here. In the 2021 election, the SNP took 1.2 million votes in the constituencies and got 62 seats. They also took 1 million votes in the list and got 2 seats, whereas the Greens got 187,000 votes on the list and got 8 seats, which means it's, I think, 32 times easier to elect a Green MSP via the list than it is an SNP MSP via list, assuming they win a lot of constituency seats. And that's why you've got a Green party in Scotland, which is full of nationalists. That's why they do it, because by wearing a green hat, but still spouting a load of SNP garbage, it's 32 times easier to get yourself elected. And that's why we're in this mess. So what we said then was, well, we might as well do the same thing. We all want the same thing. Why don't we make sure that we get a group of pro-UK candidates from a party which doesn't stand in or doesn't win any seats in the constituency either, and do it that way? It didn't quite work out, mainly because our main guy was rather a divisive character, Mr. Galloway, but also because people were reluctant and people were afraid that we should just vote Labour Conservative instead. Well, you did it, guys. You voted Labour, and then Labour voted for the hate crimes bill and the GRR bill. So that was a good move, wasn't it? So next time, guys, as I said last night in the majority show, listen, when a party comes along and says, look, here are undisputable facts and statistics. This is how you get more pro-UK people in. This is how you get more people in who will actually oppose the SNP rather than saying, oh, what a great idea. Gender recognition bill, don't know what a woman is. Yes, sign me up for that. I mean, come on, guys, seriously. So the next election, just think. And again, as Mark said, I'm not lecturing anybody, but just listen to what people are actually saying about what they stand for, and don't just say, oh, the thing is, I don't want to lose the chance of voting in a Labour. I'll just stick with Labour. Oh, do that if you want, but in this election, when it's first past the post and Labour's got 40% of the vote, yeah, absolutely vote Labour, 100%. Do it at the next Holyrood election, where you can actually make a difference about what happens in Scotland day to day. I'd look very, very, very closely at what the individual parties are saying they're going to do if they get in, and I'd vote on that basis. So, but again, when it comes to that time, as Mark said, tactical voting will be far more important then. Parties should only really be standing candidates and asking for your votes if they've got a genuine chance of winning. So all of these, say, splinter parties who stand on maybe one issue, that's all very nice. But at the moment, the problem is the Scottish voting. So the idea of the Scottish voting system, I'm sorry to rant here, the idea of the whole voting system is that the main parties win seats in the constituencies and the smaller parties then get representation in the list. What actually happens is one party wins practically all the constituencies, and so all the other parties, including the major parties who've had their asses kicked in the constituencies, are reliant on the list to get their MSPs sneaked in the back door, and so the small parties get absolutely left out. In the last Holyrood election, only 4 parties won seats in the constituencies, and only 5 parties overall won seats because the Greens won some seats via the list. It's a complete distortion of what Holyrood's supposed to be about, and I think at some stage there will be a return to. So there will be some additional legislation which will ensure representation of small parties, because at the moment they're not represented at all. And that's why it's almost a waste of time voting for a small party. And this leads on to another little point which we haven't touched on, Mark, and that is the spectre of the Reform Party, which is not a factor in this election in Scotland, maybe in England. But my prediction is come 2 years' time, an awful lot of people will be thinking maybe Reform's the answer, even in Scotland.
Yeah, because they are getting quite a bit of good polling down in England, and that they are being the alternative to the Conservatives, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's where they seem to be getting a lot of traction from. Because Matt, I have said this quite a few times as well. I do think this election will be the general election. The whole of the UK, it will be in my opinion, I think it will be a small turnout. I think it could be one of the smallest turnouts we've seen for a generation, at least, in my opinion, because I think it's because people are so fed up of politics. They feel that politicians are living in a bubble. They're not listening now. And I'm not just talking one party or the government. I'm talking, I think people are thinking, no, Labour's not listening to us. They've not listened to us on the GRR. They've not listened to us on the hate bill. They've not listened to us on our concerns. That you've got scandals coming out of Labour, anti-Semitism. You've got Angela Rayner and her issues with housing and that's now being investigated by the police. You have, and then they look at Conservatives and say, well, you promised all these things you promised, you haven't done.
Yeah.
And you're not listening to us. And I think people are thinking, well, I'm not going to vote Conservative because they've not done what they promised. I don't want to vote Labour because I don't like what they're doing. Lib Dems are pretty, who are they? And
quite.
People are just going to sit back and say, I'm just not going to vote. And I think I see that quite a bit. Do you differ on that, David? Do you think?
No, and I listen. You're saying, I think, what most of us think, Mark. To be honest, the people are fed up with the existing parties. The Conservatives came to power saying, "We'll get Brexit done." Okay, well, they just about got it done. Tore themselves apart in the process because half of them didn't want to do it. Boris Johnson was. We got exactly what we thought we'd get with Boris Johnson. To be honest, he's a big, larger than life, possibly not exactly following the rules guy who's going to do his own thing. And if he tells lies in the process and
too much baggage.
Exactly. He has indeed. That's what he's like. Then in came what was it? What's her name? Liz Truss. Oh, God. Well, she took a chance by saying, "Okay, let's tax cut our way through this inflation cycle." And I think all the economists were horrified. It might have worked at another time, but it wasn't going to work then. So she had to go. And then in comes Rishi Sunak, who's a little bit tame, shall we say? We'll stop the boats. They kept saying, "We'll stop the boats." Really? You'll never stop the boats, guys. Let's be honest. That's just the most empty rhetoric you'll ever hear. So a lot of people, traditional Conservatives, are looking at them thinking, I'm not seeing a Conservative Party there at all. Fifth term, don't make me laugh. Not going to happen. You've got Keir Starmer, who's come in. Blessedly, he's replaced Corbyn, thank heavens. So the influence of that complete shower is over now, it seems anyway, thank God. But Keir Starmer's a little bit vanilla, let's be honest. He's not exactly thrilling. His deputy, as you say, is maybe a little questionable. Lib Dems, well, they want to just be the middle ground. They want to be the progressive, the left wing, the happening, the caring, sharing, all this nonsense. And their thunder's been stolen by the Greens and the SNP, so they're having to try twice as hard to do all that nonsense. We've all seen Alex Cole happen with this. Beth, this is for you, Beth. You think, God, what? But nonetheless, those three parties are still a better option in Scotland than the SNP, bizarrely. Yeah. The problem is they don't really capture the public imagination. Nobody's going to say, I'm proud to vote. You're not going to go out and cry with emotion at voting for Keir Starmer, are you really? I mean, never. It's not going to happen. Nor Rishi Sunak come to that. So, and certainly not Ed Davey. So, no, that's just not going to happen. But yeah, it's a probability that the Labour Party will win the election. I don't think it's going to be for like 200 seats by an 80, 90 seat majority. I don't see that. I don't see the Conservative Party falling as much as polls predict, unless they lose a lot of seats to reform, which is possible.
You normally see when someone has such a big lead as Labour's had for such a long time, you normally see a closing as the election gets closer and there's a date there. It closes a little bit. So I do agree. I think Conservatives will. I think Labour will win. I think they'll win with a majority, but it won't be a big majority. It will just be a working majority, in my view.
I think that's true. I mean, a lot of the smart money is saying that, maybe 30 seats. Thatcher won in 79 with, I think, a 43-seat majority. It's going to be about that kind of number, because I think it's a similar thing. That was just the end of two not particularly popular and not particularly effective Labour administrations. They won two elections in 74, and then by 79, I think everyone had enough of them, including the SNP, of course, who voted to bring in Margaret Thatcher. Well done, guys, fantastic. But this time, I think the Conservatives have had 4 consecutive election wins. Probably time for a change, and of course, the statistic. Which I always like to come up with statistic. Only 2 Labour leaders who were born after the party was formed have won general elections. Harold Wilson, Tony Blair. That's incredible. That's 124 years. So
Yeah.
now it's going to be a third, and it looks like, thank God it wasn't Corbyn, but yeah, it was never going to be him. But it looks like it will be Starmer. Yeah. The big thing for me, the thing I want most of all in this election, you quote me on this, the best thing for UK democracy and Scottish democracy would be that the party that wins most seats throughout the UK also wins most seats in Scotland, because that ends the Scottish nationalists' plea that, oh my God, we never get the party we vote for. But the reality is, of course, Mark, what the Scottish National Party wants is to get a government they didn't vote for, because then they can say, oh my God, this is terrible, we get the government England votes for. But all the SNP is doing is making it impossible for anything else to happen, because they're saying, no, don't vote for Labour, vote for us, vote for the SNP. Because why? Because that way then we get the party that England votes for. Yeah, I suppose you're right. But that's what it is. They are telling their own people, don't vote for the party that can win the election, vote for us. Because we can't win the election. Therefore, you'll get the party of England votes for, and then we can moan about it. It's just, that's the thing. The SNP, the whole platform of the SNP is built on nothing at all except half-truths and deception. And I think the Scottish electorate's had enough of it, and let's hope they do, because Labour's not perfect. They've made a lot of dumb decisions in backing SNP policy, but let's be honest, guys, what's worse, voting for a party which sometimes backs ridiculous SNP legislation, or voting for the SNP itself, which comes up with the legislation in the first place? Well, to me, there's only one answer. So that's why they probably will do what we hope they'll do for this time. And if they perform badly, the Labour Party, they will be straight out again, believe me. So it's up to them. What they can't do, Mark, what the Labour Party can't do is come in and say, well, thanks for that, SNP, and I tell you what, because you've been so sporting, we'll give you a referendum. They're not going to do that, not a chance, because particularly if it is proven that the Labour Party can't win in the UK without also winning in Scotland, then they'll never give the referendum to the SNP, because it'd be cutting their own throats to do so. So now I'm actually quite optimistic about what will happen this year, really. So hopeful anyway.
Well, what will it's been a great discussion, David. What we'll do, if you're up for it, is come just before the election, when we get a date, and just before the election, we'll come back to this, and we'll do another show on tactical voting and what needs to happen, because I do think it is pretty vital.
Definitely. I mean, if you're reaching big numbers, that would be great to have this platform. And of course, it would be an opportunity to say to people, here is the guide, and this is how you find it. And by that stage, you'll have all this, and people will know exactly what the right thing is to do. I think at this stage, it's just about getting the idea across and explaining to people, exactly as you said, we're not lecturing you, we're not ordering you. It's just, if your desire in this election, if your objective is to get rid of the SNP, the strong recommendation is to do this, because this is how it will happen. That's it.
It's just giving people the information and to something new to think about to try and get rid of the SNP.
Absolutely.
So, what we'll do now, I'm going to do a quick Ziggy's rant, and then we'll end the show. But it's been really interesting discussing this, and I do think we will come back to this nearer the election, when we got a date. The campaign starts. I think we'll need to, and we'll go into more detail, I think, David, on what we want. So
great. Listen, as always, you've come up with some excellent points, stuff I hadn't thought of. So well done. I'm happy to discuss it with you anytime, Mark. That'd be great.
Cheers. Back in 2 seconds for a Ziggy's rant, and then that will end the show. So it's now Ziggy's rant. So it's not so much a rant as a plea. I think I'm pleading with people in Scotland to think about and discuss tactical voting. And even if you're thinking now, I will never vote for a certain party, but that party is in the best position to get rid of the SNP, I would just like you to think and just discuss it and think about, do we want another 5 years or 7 years of the SNP, or do we want to get rid of this? We need to get rid of this party. We need to get a new government in Scotland that's going to look after, that's going to bring out some decent policies, that's not going to be divisive, and it's going to bring the country back together. Because that's what we need more than anything, is the country to come together again and to start looking out for Scotland's position within the UK, and to look after that and start working with Westminster. That's what we need more than anything, is a party in Scotland to work with the government in the UK. And if we do that, I think we will prosper. We can only prosper, and we'll be a lot better off. So please, I know you have party affiliation, and I'm not, and as we've said before, well, I would never ever tell anybody who they should vote for. That is your right, that is your decision. But just think about it and discuss it and get more information on tactical voting and in your area, and let's see if we can get rid of the SNP out of Scotland, out of government, because it's desperately needed. So that's my rant, David. Any final words from you?
I would say I echo every single word Mark just said, and I applaud Mark for the efforts, the many efforts he's put in over the last few months and years into creating a platform to which people listen to him, and he is also providing a great, very valuable role here in what he's doing, and he talks eminent sense. Please listen to him. You won't go wrong if you do.
Thank you, David. And we will come back and we will go into more detail about tactical voting come election time. So watch out for that. So thank you very much for listening. Please leave your comments on the show. They're always great to listen, to read your comments. Like if you've enjoyed the show, and subscribe so I can reach as many people as possible. So and please go and watch on Wednesdays 7 p.m. Go and watch the Majority Show with David, Mary, and Mark. It's a brilliant show to watch. It's reaching a lot of people now, and they do great work. So thanks for that, David, and until next time. Take care.
And indeed, of course, Mark is also an occasional contributor to the Majority, and he does a terrific job there also.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, guys. All the best, everyone.
Bye.